That night, the atmosphere during the family dinner was as usual. The soft yellow light on the dining table, the simple yet cozy meal, and the familiar stories about work and life floated through the conversation like a routine deeply embedded in every corner of this family. However, while everyone chatted happily, Vincent felt that something was off, though he couldn't pinpoint exactly what it was. The glass of water in his hand was what made him uneasy. The taste was a little different, not anything specific, just an oddity he couldn't explain. A cold sensation slid down his throat as he lifted the glass, and Diane's gaze, his mother-in-law, seemed to light up in a strange way when he reached for the glass. As a freelance photographer, Vincent had learned to pay attention to the smallest details, as his profession required him to notice things others wouldn't. And that vague feeling inside him could not be wrong. He said nothing, simply observing quietly, following every movement of her, his eyes sharp and somewhat cautious. "I think you should drink this before saying anything more." Diane, his mother-in-law, softly smiled, her voice warm as always, but with a cold undertone hiding behind it. Her eyes held something that Vincent couldn't immediately decipher, a feeling that was both gentle and cold. Vincent seemed unable to do anything but nod, but inside, suspicion was rising. He wasn't a man easily suspicious, but this was different. His eyes lingered on the glass, then returned to her, a thought flashing through his mind. He had to do something, otherwise it might be too late. With an unusual calmness, Vincent quietly swapped his glass with his father-in-law's when no one was looking. He didn't want to make a scene just yet. He only needed to observe the reactions of others. And if something happened, at least it wouldn't be him. If it's not me, then it's him, he thought to himself as he placed the glass into his father-in-law's hand while his eyes never left Diane. A few minutes later, the meal continued, but the tension inside Vincent did not ease. He watched his father-in-law, who was laughing and chatting happily, but suddenly he raised his hand to his neck as if feeling suffocated. A grimace, a shake of the head as though dizzy, then he slowly slumped down, his lips moving as if he wanted to say something but couldn't. No screams, no words of blame, just a suffocating silence that hung over everything. Everything seemed to stop abruptly, and in that moment, Vincent felt a terrifying truth revealing itself. Diane was trying to kill him. That feeling, that moment when suspicion became reality, made Vincent unable to breathe. He could barely swallow, his eyes meeting hers, his mother-in-law whom he had trusted. And in his heart, a wordless question slowly formed. Could his mother-in-law, the person he had always considered family, go this far? Vincent was a gentle man, reserved, and never sought attention for himself. He didn't need recognition or the spotlight. His freelance photography work wasn't a stable career, but it was a passion he had pursued for years. Each photograph he took wasn't just a moment captured, but a story, a piece of his soul blending with the world around him. And for Vincent, that was enough to live a peaceful and sincere life. His life with his wife, Nancy, though not wealthy, was warm. They had quiet evenings together, light-hearted conversations about work, the future, and sometimes simple dreams. But for Vincent, there was always a sense of dissatisfaction when it came to his mother-in-law's family. The looks from Diane, her casual but contemptuous remarks, all of it felt like a shadow weighing down on their relationship. Diane was a powerful woman, always wanting her daughter to live according to the principles she thought were right. She was the type of person who tried to control Nancy's life, and Vincent understood that. But because he loved his wife, he didn't want those disagreements to affect their life together. He couldn't deny that every time Diane mentioned his career, she would look at him with a dismissive judgment, as though his work wasn't worthy of her family. But Nancy was different. She was an intelligent, independent, and strong woman. However, she was also easily influenced, especially by her parents. Though she knew her mother had a tendency to take control of her life, she always believed that everything her mother did was out of love. This made her unaware that that love had turned into manipulation, an invisible noose that she couldn't break free from, that she couldn't escape. She always thought her mother knew what was best for her, even though Diane constantly criticized Vincent, always thinking he wasn't strong enough to protect her. One evening, during a family dinner, like every other time, Vincent felt that something was off. Everything seemed normal, the laughter, the clinking of dishes, the aroma of the food, but he felt a strange, inexplicable feeling. His glass of water, placed in front of him, seemed different than usual. A vague taste, a peculiar sensation touched his tongue, making him stop. He looked at the glass, a sudden suspicion rising in his chest. That feeling couldn't be wrong, though his rational mind tried to dismiss it. He looked at Diane, who was smiling gently, her face calm as always. But her gaze, something was different. Vincent stared into her eyes, and once again, the unease crept over him. "I think you should drink this before saying anything more," Diane said, her voice warm but carrying an undertone that was chilling deep in her gaze. Her words were gentle, like an innocuous suggestion, but in Vincent's heart, it felt like a warning. In an instant, he decided. Without a word, he quietly swapped his glass of water with his father-in-law's, who was sitting right next to him. It was a quick action, unnoticed by anyone, but Vincent felt a change in his heart. He couldn't understand why, but a part of him knew this was an important decision. Only a few minutes later, everything started to unfold. His father-in-law, Tim, began to show signs of discomfort. He raised his hand to his neck, a confused expression, as though choking, then slowly shook his head as if dizzy. In just a moment, he slowly slumped down, his eyes glazed over, mouth unable to form words. The entire dinner went silent, the shift in the atmosphere like a wave sweeping everything away. Vincent watched his father-in-law closely, his heart full of worry, but he knew this was intentional. He couldn't ignore it, but he couldn't let panic spread either. No one said anything, no one recognized the truth, but Vincent knew clearly, Diane was trying to kill him. The whole space became silent, only the tiny ticking sounds of the clock on the wall could be heard. Vincent looked at Diane. She was calm, as though nothing had happened. But Vincent knew, in that moment, his mother-in-law was testing her power. He couldn't let her continue to control his life. No screams, no words of blame, just the silence of fear spreading through the air. In that instant, Vincent understood what he had to do to protect his family, to protect the happiness he and Nancy had built. After that dinner, as everything was still rushing through Vincent's mind, he couldn't let it all go quietly. The unease and doubt wouldn't fade. If Diane had gone this far, he couldn't just ignore it. He needed to uncover the truth, even if it meant facing the most painful things. Vincent didn't rush. He did everything quietly, meticulously. He sent the water sample for testing, telling no one, only he knew of the plan. When the results came back, he felt something break inside him. The water sample Diane had given him contained a neurotoxin, a drug that could cause fatigue, headaches, and a lack of focus, enough to ruin a photographer's career. It was the drug Diane used to subtly torment him piece by piece. He couldn't stop there. The truth was now clear, but Vincent knew he needed more evidence to protect himself and Nancy. He decided to install a mini camera in the house, not only to monitor Diane's conversations, but also to record any words she might say about her plans. The following days, he secretly observed her every move, every word in that house. And finally, he couldn't believe what he heard. One night, when Diane and her husband were sitting and talking in the living room, Vincent captured the recording that would later change everything. "We need to help Nancy see the truth," Diane said, her voice soft yet full of calculation. "She doesn't understand that she can't live with a man like Vincent. Let her see that divorce is the only option. And as for his career, I will do everything to make sure it no longer has a chance to develop." Vincent felt a chill run down his spine as he heard these words. The feeling of betrayal, being thrust into a game he wasn't even part of, made it impossible for him to stay still. Every word Diane spoke felt like a sharp knife, each strike slow and deliberate, tearing into the lives of him and Nancy. But he didn't stop there. The emails Diane had sent to an old friend were also found by Vincent after a meticulous investigation. These letters not only discussed sabotaging his career, but also detailed plans to force Nancy to leave him. Everything was carefully planned, step by step, as if she had been waiting for this opportunity for a long time. With all the evidence in his hands, Vincent decided to face the entire family. He couldn't hide in the shadows anymore. He couldn't let Diane continue to destroy his life and Nancy's. One evening, when the whole family sat gathered around the dinner table, Vincent decided to open his laptop and play Diane's recording along with the evidence he had gathered. He moved his finger across the mouse, opening each email Diane had sent, each confession she had made, every detail about her plan. The room froze as the recording began to play. Diane's voice sounded like an indictment, each admission a heavy blow to everyone in the room. Nancy sat silently, her eyes wide open, but she couldn't utter a word. The shock and disbelief paralyzed her, unable to believe what was unfolding before her. His father-in-law, Tim, sat quietly, his hands on the table, his head bowed, unwilling to meet his daughter's gaze. He knew that things had gone too far, and he could no longer deny the truth. Diane sat there, her face no longer the confident and sharp one she usually wore. She stared at the screen, her face pale, unable to speak another word. She hadn't anticipated that her own plans would lead her to this point. She couldn't deny what had been proven so clearly. "It's not like that. I just wanted you," Diane tried to say, but her voice choked, unable to continue. "What you wanted, you've already achieved," Vincent replied coldly. "You didn't just ruin my life, you've destroyed your own daughter's life. But everything ends today." The atmosphere in the room grew heavy. Nancy remained still, her gaze sad and full of disappointment. She couldn't believe that the woman who had raised her, the one she always thought was the only person who loved her unconditionally, could go this far. She couldn't believe that Diane was the one behind all the suffering she had endured over the years. Her father-in-law finally sighed, stood up from the table, and walked away, his eyes full of disappointment. He knew that, no matter how hard he tried, Diane had no way back. Everything was now out in the open. In that moment, Nancy stood motionless, her eyes fixed on her mother, her heart heavy. She couldn't imagine that her mother could be the one behind all the nightmares she and Vincent had gone through. It was then that Nancy realized that, for all these years, her mother had been manipulating her with a twisted form of love, a controlling love disguised under warm hugs, under what seemed like harmless advice. For the first time, Nancy faced her mother, not out of love or forgiveness, but because of a decisive choice. She was determined to stand by her husband, the one who had always loved and protected her, the one her mother had always looked down upon. It was a difficult decision, but the right one. It was the first time in her life that she didn't let family emotions overpower her reason. "Nancy," Diane said, her voice choked, trying to find an explanation, "I just want what's best for you. I just want you to be happy." But Nancy could no longer accept those words. She was no longer the naive girl, easily influenced. She no longer wanted to hear her mother's excuses for her actions. "You've gone too far, and I can't keep living in your shadow anymore," Nancy said, her voice trembling but resolute. Vincent stood by her side, holding her hand tightly, being her greatest source of strength and support in that moment. They had decided, not just for their family life, but for freedom to not be controlled by anyone, not even by her mother. With full determination, they decided to move out of Nancy's parents' house, to leave everything related to Diane behind. They would no longer let themselves be caught in her schemes. This decision wasn't easy, but they knew it was necessary. They found a small house in the suburbs, a place free from manipulation, where there were no judgments from her mother, where they could rebuild their lives and start a new chapter full of hope. When they moved out, everything in the house seemed empty. The objects, the memories, everything had to be left behind when this life had already been so devastated by control and oppression. Nancy looked at her house one last time, a house once full of laughter, now only left with silence. But she knew this silence wasn't the end. It was the beginning of a new life. After Nancy and Vincent moved out, Diane couldn't keep her composure. Rumors about her started to spread throughout the community, endless gossip about her manipulation of her daughter. People in their social circle began to look at her differently, no longer with respect, but with disdain. Diane's name became the topic of behind the backstories, of strange and suspicious looks. Diane lost control of her daughter, no longer had access to her grandchildren. This feeling was a shock to her, for she had been so used to controlling everything in the family, even Nancy's life. She had once thought her love was enough to keep her daughter by her side forever. But now, her manipulation had no place anymore. The price Diane had to pay for her authoritarian ways was too high. She couldn't admit that she had destroyed everything, not only Vincent's career, but also her own family. In a world where she had once ruled, she was now the one left behind, with rumors and loneliness surrounding her. The people she once knew no longer respected her. Her relationships slowly crumbled, and she was left alone in her empty house. Vincent and Nancy, on the other hand, started anew with fresh hope. They built a family based on love, respect, and freedom. They were no longer influenced by schemes, no longer had to hide their true feelings. Every day they lived was a day of freedom, making their own decisions without anyone forcing or manipulating them. That was the freedom they had found, and with it, they would never return to the mistakes of the past. The price Diane had to pay for her manipulation was one she could never understand. It was the loss of her own family. But Vincent and Nancy didn't hate her. They simply decided to move forward, stronger and freer. Vincent and Nancy, after everything they had been through, finally found peace in a small house in the countryside where there was no noise from the city nor judgment from others. The house was hidden among the lush green fields, with fresh air and gentle winds blowing through the leaves. This was a place where they could breathe a sigh of relief and start over. Vincent opened a nature photography studio where he could freely create and capture beautiful pictures of landscapes of simple yet meaningful life. He no longer had to bear the pressure of pleasing anyone or living up to anyone else's expectations. The photos he took were no longer just work but a vivid passion, a way for him to express his love for nature and the world around him. Nancy also found joy in her work again. She started running her own online shop where she sold handmade products that she created, from small decorative items to creative handmade goods. Every day, she devoted time to her work, to her passion, and most importantly, to her family. Her relationship with Vincent grew stronger, with no outside interference, no control from others. They were living true to themselves, no longer needing to show off or prove anything. "Hey love, I got a big order today." Nancy smiled as Vincent entered the room, holding a cup of coffee. "I feel proud of what I'm doing." Vincent placed the cup down on the table and looked at his wife with pride. "You deserve all the best, Nancy. I'm so proud of you." She lowered her head, her eyes sparkling with joy and happiness. She knew that, even though life wasn't perfect, they had built a happy family with their own hands. No one could take that away from them. Every day, they felt the simple joy of the small things. In the mornings, they would go out to the garden, tending to the plants and watching the flowers bloom. In the evenings, they sat together, sharing stories about work, dreams, and memories. Life became peaceful and complete in the love they shared. Meanwhile, Diane still lived in loneliness, not realizing that she had lost everything because of her wrong decisions. She didn't recognize the harm in how she treated Nancy. She still believed everything she did was out of love, that it was for her daughter's happiness. But she didn't understand that love isn't control. It's not about dominating someone's life. Each day, Diane faced the emptiness in her heart as she no longer had control over her daughter. Her calls were never answered, and when she tried to visit, Nancy and Vincent had already moved out, leaving her with a quiet house, walls with no one to talk to. Her old friends began to distance themselves, and the gossip about her became a subject in every conversation. Diane still didn't regret her actions. She didn't understand that her manipulation and control had destroyed everything she loved. In her eyes, she was always right, always doing what was best for the family, but she didn't see that it was her control that had pushed her daughter away. And now she was left alone in her empty house, looking back at the life she had built. The price she had to pay was not just the material loss, but the loneliness, the loss of her daughter's love. Vincent and Nancy never wanted revenge on Diane. They didn't need to do that. They only needed to reclaim their own lives. They didn't want to live in the shadows of others, nor did they want anyone controlling their lives anymore. Their relationship grew stronger, undeterred by anyone. They had rebuilt their family from strong decisions, from the freedom and love they shared for one another. In the end, Vincent and Nancy's life was just as they had always dreamed of. No more interference, no more control. They lived happily, freely, and full of love, walking through life hand in hand. Have you ever been manipulated by someone in the name of family? Do you think Diane deserves forgiveness? Like if you've ever overcome people who thought they knew what's best for you more than you did. Comment if you've ever had to leave a toxic relationship, even if it was family. Subscribe so you don't miss more inspiring, unmasking, revealing stories.